My name is AJ and I'm your host. See, for thousands of years, philosophers, thinkers, theologists, all humans, right, have been trying to figure out where morality comes from. Who dictates morality? How do we determine what is right and what is wrong? Is morality objective? Is it subjective? There always seems to be more questions than answers. In ancient times, before the development of modern scientific tools and our understanding of human anatomy, humans assigned the unknown to all kinds of different gods. Anything from thunder, fertility, the stars, and yes, morality. Now, I'm here to challenge you to talk to us today. If you think that morality comes from the God that you believe in specifically, you can dial 948 400 5656 or click the link in the live chat to call through your computer because Critical Call is starting right now. Hey, welcome back, or welcome, I guess, because you've been on the other shows on this channel, but not this specific show. So, welcome. How are
That's
you
right.
doing,
Thank
Jada?
you. I'm good. I'm good. Thank you very much.
Cool. I'm excited to have you here because last time we had some pretty good conversations, and I want to continue in those. But first of all, let me remind everybody that's watching, everybody in the chat, you can send super chats. If you have anything to call about, again, just dial the number, click the buttons, make sure you like the stream, that you comment and stuff like that. So that out of the way. um, I was gonna ask you a question, all right?
Shoot.
Because I'm doing a video for John the Skeptic, like the one that you did for him last year when he went on holiday. Right?
hmm
Do you have any recommendations? A favorite, best, worst apologist?
Ooh. Ooh. Let's see. Um, if you really want to scrape the barrel, you could
Ooh.
go with the likes of Matt Powell. You could go with Kent Hovind.
Oh,
Um,
woman.
yeah. If you, that's pretty much it's going to be anti-science. If you want to go, like debunking arguments against God, you could go with someone like Cliff Connectly. Um, if you want to go more philosophy, you could go inspiring philosophy. There's if you want
Oh
to get
gosh.
in the if you want to get in the like in the real trenches, and you want to get dirty, you could go after someone like Jay Dyer or Made by Jim Bob or someone like that. But there's a lot of really bad ones out there.
Colorful.
Yeah. There's a lot of
Yeah.
a lot of good options if you're looking for something terrible.
Actually, completely forgot about inspiring philosophy. When I first started sort of deconverting, watching YouTube and stuff, my husband started kind of like watching too because he's very into. Well, he used to be very into believing in ghosts and stuff like
Mm.
that. So um, I think he didn't want to let that idea go, that belief. It was like he didn't believe in gods anymore, but like he really held on to the belief in like ghosts and spirits or sort of that consciousness is not really, um, coming from the brain or from just the brain, rather,
Right.
that it can come from something else as well. And so he started sending me videos well, the first one that he sent me, as soon as I started watching it by Inspiring Philosophy, I was like, yeah, no. I told him, stop watching that channel, please. I don't know if he continued. I don't think so. But I was like, yeah, no, thank you. It was too
Yeah,
much.
he's the inspiring philosophy is the guy who I think his name is Cameron Bertuzzi or something like that. But he took it upon himself to really try to express why he didn't want to engage with atheists anymore He's like, I just don't. He's like, it's not worth it engaging with him, and there's a very real reason why. It's because his position is indefensible, and so it's just him trying to repeat the same things over and over again, and he kind of had backed up, but he still makes a lot of claims, and those claims can still be addressed in a logically consistent fashion. So, I mean, there's like I said, there's a number of them out there. It just depends upon how low you're willing to go, like how low the fruit it is you want to pick. So, but yeah, there's some recommendations.
Yeah, and I think it's a good one because the way he speaks, and I think this is the reason my husband was sort of drawn to him, is very, um, I will say, kind of the way that illusionists do their tricks. You
Mm,
know, like they really work to make you believe that what they're saying is true. Like they have all the information and the knowledge, or like at least the vocabulary to make you feel that way. And for
right,
somebody that doesn't understand that type of stuff, it can be very convincing. It can be very convincing
right.
that what they're saying is factual.
If yeah, I mean, I think another one that popped to mind is red pen. I think it's red pen logic. Um, red pen logic is that his kind of like shtick is he takes somebody's like written argument and then he takes a red pen and makes corrections all over it. So
Oh,
he's red pen logic. It's really bad. It's there's like beyond terrible, but that's another possibility. Is I haven't some of these people I haven't covered in quite some time because I've covered them myself so many times that I'm kind of feel like I'm repeating myself because they never change. And so I've been looking for recently I've been looking for new people to respond to, and because the pickings are getting kind of slim. Otherwise, I'm just repeating the same stuff over and over and over again. So
yeah. I wonder if that red pen thing comes from that idea of like the red letter, the red lettering thing from the Bible, or is,
I think it's both. I think it's
uh,
because he's such a hardcore apologist. You know, the red letter Bible, but of course, also when you're in school and the teacher would take a red pen and mark out all your
that's
stuff. So I think he had to play on the word. So
that's true. That's true. All right, let's get into the real topic that we are here to talk about.
yes, and
And
arguably one of my favorite debates. This
well,
is
let's
like
go.
one of all the debates that I've taken part in. Like whatever you like this, like this one is one of my favorites because it's the easiest to win. So,
And I really hope we get some good calls for this.
mm,
But let's start with your background because the reason I thought about bringing you on for this topic was because you say you have a background in forensic psychology and pathology. I believe you said. Did you
mhm.
just study it, or like did you actually work with that?
So I was in school for it, and in school we did clinic hours, and we also worked in the lab. So it was a combination of both empirical science and a lot of like case study and a number of other areas that we worked in. People that we spoke with, and of course a few field trips here and there. But I've got my opportunity to get my hands dirty in the field, never as a profession. Trying that was the unfortunate thing. As much as I love the field, trying to get a job in that area is extraordinarily difficult because the number of spots are low. There's a very limited number of spots, and in order for one of them to open up, typically people either have to retire or they die. So I was faced with the difficulty of needing to if I wanted to progress, I needed to take out more student loans to possibly get the background I need for a job that I may never get I may if I get lucky, I get, and then I'm off working doing something else. Yeah, I got my hands dirty and I absolutely loved every aspect of it. Understanding the hows and the whys that people do the things that they do. Really fascinating material, but yeah, I say a really fascinating subject. So
What was like your favorite type of, I guess, crime to solve?
So as far as like, it's not really. I would say like as far as like
Yeah.
crimes that I did, there were a number of case studies that were in aberrant psychology, and when you're studying things into like antisocial personality disorder and. Back when I was in school, we were studying with the DSM-4 TR, which is the revised version of the DSM-4. Nowadays, they have the DSM-5 TR is already out, so there's been some updates to that. So when we were studying, I really enjoyed abnormal and aberrant psychology, is diving into those things, kind of like the extreme cases. the stuff that you see like maybe like less than 1% of all like real crime. And those are the ones that get me, because as much as we want to say that we want to, as people, as a society, we kind of want to generalize all negative crime, like all like immoral activity. We want to put it into one set, and we want to kind of like, and we have a tendency to write that off, to like write those individuals off. But when you get down into it and you start studying these things, you recognize that a lot, like 99% of the terrible things that people do in this world, I would say 99, probably 99.5, the vast majority of them are done out of fear and desperation. It's the circumstances of their lives that have driven them to do these horrible things. When people feel like they have no way out, that people feel that they're trapped, people feel like they're losing control over their lives, people feel like things are being taken from them and they don't know what to do. They have no support systems. They have no method of like reasserting control over themselves. And that's when you get into humans typically acting at their worst or acting at their lowest, is when you find them at their lowest.
Wow.
Real monsters are very, very rare, are incredibly rare. And so one thing I loved about it was, especially studying cases like, cases like Leopold and Loeb, or cases like the classic, serial killers that you study about, like Kemper and Bundy and Gein, who wasn't really a serial killer in that respect, but a number of individuals. You look at these and you get a sense. The one thing I loved the most about it was that it opened me up to being more empathetic to the things that go around us, the things that are going on all around us, is that real monsters are extraordinarily rare. And so,
Wow.
most of the time they're made, they're not just like born, people broken like that. That's like beyond rare. Most people, they're made the way they are. The circumstances have resulted in it. It allowed me to be more empathetic with these individuals and to understand them a lot better, and recognize that while they are culpable for their actions are understandable as a result of the circumstances in which they were. So it
Oh my
opened me
god.
up. It opened up my humanity, recognizing that.
So I've been trying to do better at being a humanist, right? And part of being able to understand a little bit how the brain works and how behavior comes to be, and like that, for example, that true psychopathy is like extremely rare. Right? Like everybody uses that word. Oh, you're a psychopath, whatever. No, that's very, very,
Mm.
very rare. But
Yeah,
I
those kinds of
experienced,
things, like malignant antisocial personality disorder
yeah,
with like homicidal ideation, or like you could say like psychopathic traits, or sociopathic traits, like that. These things are, way back when we were starting to develop the understanding of these things, they seem to be more common. But now that we've had more people come through, we've been able to analyze more people, we've been able to develop case studies on a number of individuals over time, over the past some 40, 50 years. We understand that these things are extremely nuanced. They're not the same for every single person. There's always going to be a slight variation from person to person, and you are going to have some overlap, but it really has to be taken on a case by case basis. But what
yeah,
we do know now, is that the really, really horrible stuff is just beyond rare. It's like, it's not something that like the average individual just walking about through their lives needs to really be concerned about. What they need to be concerned about are the the social issues that persist on a day-to-day basis, that result in the fear and desperation and anger that results in people doing the things that they do. If we can solve those, we would
yeah,
invariably solve the vast majority of crimes that take place out there, because people wouldn't be in situations where these things would appear to them to be their only way out. So
yeah. What you just said like really blew my mind, because I had an instance of somebody in my life who did something that I considered like really bad, right? And lots of lies involved and stuff like that hurt a lot of people. But then further down the line, I found out that the reason was that they had a reason for doing those things. And like you said, it truly was like fear and not having a supportive system around them. And despite knowing those things, it was like it didn't quite click in my mind. And now that you're saying
right,
it's like, yeah, like I need to have more empathy on that aspect. Like
right,
obviously, yeah, like you said, there's still I guess responsible for the consequences
Right.
that came from those actions. But at the same time, we can still have uh, empathy toward them for the circumstances behind the actions that originated
And
out of that
by us
situation.
recognizing that, by our ability to empathize with that, to understand why it took place, we are better equipped as a society to try and solve those problems to ensure that it doesn't happen again. Because if it can happen to one person, it could easily happen to another. And by that should be that right there should be the impetus on our society to solve these issues, to make sure they don't happen. Things that could easily be solved by a restructuring of society or moving, adjusting the budget like this, ensuring that these little trap, I don't want to call them traps because I don't think that they're intentional in
Uh,
that sense,
yeah,
but the pitfalls, that the natural pitfalls that exist in every day-to-day life, well, if we have those if people know that they're working with a net, you know, it's a lot easier. But when people think they have a net and then all of a sudden they realize they don't, that's
yeah.
when it gets really, really bad. That's when the worst tends to come out. And so, but these, like I said, I think that these things can be easily solved, and but it's up to us to be able to do them. So
That's very true. And I mean, it is a systemic thing because, for example, if you have just one example, right? If you have a woman who is married and they have children, and let's say the father is physically abusing the children or and even the woman, and these are people who have a low income
mhm.
and barely have food to scrape by. And so the woman does not have the ability to remove herself from that situation. And so she may make choices that are not the best based on in the same circumstances that she finds herself in. But if we had a better support network for women or for women with children to where they're taken care of, where they have somewhere to go. Some we do have some, but they're so hard to access and
Right.
sort of unavailable in so many ways that it's really, really hard for them to actually get away from that. There's
Typically
also, yeah.
typically they're privately funded. They're like
Mhm.
individuals or a group of individuals that have the money, that typically have the same experiences in their own life, using their resources to try and provide for the other individuals so they don't have to experience what they that's that empathy at work. We have private individuals who take it upon themselves to provide these services because the state simply doesn't. The Make no mistake, the state certainly could do it, but it chooses not to.
Yeah,
And that's, I think, a combination of both the people who are in power and the people who are empowering them by voting for them, is that these things have to come from the ground up, is that society has to want to have that, but that requires a lot of changes. And that's why I really like the morality discussion, is because we get to the core of these things. As to what we get to the core of the issue, one of the cores of the issue, I think, is that the vast majority of society doesn't believe they either believe that it's not within their power or it's not within their purview to make such changes. And that's because they believe in the existence of a God entity, or however it might be, that these are the things that the God is meant to make them, that you need to focus on your own life and focus on your own stuff and not worry about other people. But this leads us to be wholly unempathetic, especially with people that we don't see every day. We typically only empathize as far as we're attached to people. And then beyond that line of sight, out of sight, out of mind, the people we don't see. So trying to maintain that, like in a secular humanist society, we make that a priority. And
yeah,
so I think that by addressing this, by having this conversation and divesting people of this illusion, and divesting them of their misunderstandings of things, is like, you can't ground like mind stance independent things in a mind. Like, you can't do that. So, and helping them to recognize these things helps them to it certainly helped me to reevaluate my position when I was deconstructing and I realized where I was wrong.
yeah.
And hopefully we can do that with other people by having this conversation. That's why I love this debate. This is it's my favorite debate to have, because
Love
it's
that.
so a lot of things get lost in the sauce as far as philosophy goes, but this one is a really, really easy one, which is why I like it. And it's so beneficial to the society that we live in, and the society that we want to live in.
Yeah, and it would be so easy to make certain changes in general society that will make this morality that comes from our brains and stuff more a lot easier to access for people. Another
Right.
key aspect of this is you were just mentioning religion, right? And you have so many people who are raised in very fundamentalist sects of religion, what we could call a cult, probably.
Right.
And they are so used to the high control that when they move away from it and when they stop believing in that deity or wherever they God they believe in, when they get out of the cult or out of the environmental aspect of it, right? Like all the people, the church, the family, etc., that perpetuated that cult mentality.
Right.
It is so hard for them to move away from the cult mentality. It's like they physically remove all the cult, but it is still so ingrained in them. And that
Oh yeah.
leads to that leads to the next thing that we could improve, which is mental health care. Help for people recovering from religion is a great organization that does amazing things for people leaving religion, but we need a lot more of that. They're just one organization. They can't take care of all the people, that are living religion. So
One of the
mental health will
fascinating
be,
things you bring that up when people have that level of indoctrination and they're so terribly ingrained in these things, and that's a part of that's like, if anybody's not familiar with the bite model of authoritarian control developed by Dr. Hassan and his team, is that it's an absolute brilliant kind of like framework for how to look at the behaviors and to critically analyze the behaviors of the group that one is a part of. And a major aspect of those of like behavioral control, information control, thought control, and emotional control is that the cult winds up replacing the individual, or essentially they don't even really, a person born into a cult, what they wind up experiencing is never having their own identity kind of self-actualized, and they wind up having their identity dictated to them as by the group or have the leader of the group or whoever. And so by having that identity dictated to them, anything that's attached to that will automatically come with that as a package, and they begin to adopt that because that's the identity they have. Individuals who have had the time to develop and self-actualize and recognize and their own identity per their individual experiences are far less prone to being indoctrinated to that degree, and it requires a lot more dangerous tactics in order to try and get someone there, to get them into a cult. That's why they prey on the vulnerable and the people who are emotionally vulnerable, people who have exploitable weaknesses in their lives. So because they're looking for that last rung of the ladder to hang on to, and cults can jump into that by supplying them that in exchange for their very identity. That way, the individual, the cult member, becomes an extension of the cult
Mhm.
instead of they're an extension of the cult's identity instead of a well-developed or a well-rounded individual standing on their own 2 feet. They simply become another tendril of the cult to go out there and make more and find more people for the cult. So it's hard to divest someone from something that's as ingrained as their identity. And the one thing that really got me about Christianity, because I was a Christian, that got me about Christianity was how it was so difficult to shear myself away, because I recognized that I had woven a lot of these concepts into my own identity. So I had to rebuild myself
Yeah.
from almost the ground up. And that's a daunting task for a lot of people. That's where that mental health assistance, where it should be more, I say, be more plentiful in that regard, or it should be more accessible across the board. That's where that becomes really, really helpful.
Yeah, that is a really good point that you brought up, because when people are very early in their conversion, and they'll still sort of have that connection to the cult, to where they didn't
Mhm.
develop that ability to think for themselves and to not be under that authoritarian um, master.
Right.
Like they leave, but they still need someone to assert control over them, because otherwise they feel out of control. They feel like they just don't know what to do,
That
and
dependency. They need that dependency, right?
unfortunately they end up with partners who are dominant, authoritarian, controlling is such a really unfortunate thing,
Right.
and it happens to so many people. Yeah. So I was trying to catch up with the chat. Uh, oh yeah, no, there was somebody that I mentioned that should call about the topic of where did that comment go? Oh, um, support networks for men who are victims of domestic abuse. And so I encourage this person to call because it's a really good topic we could talk about. It doesn't matter whether someone is an atheist or a theist. We will still take their call on important topics. But also while we wait for theists to, tell us that morality comes from God. So, so yeah, that would be fun. Anyway, um, yeah. Did you have something you were about to say?
Oh, I hope that we get to have that conversation, because walking through someone with the notion that they believe, like, it comes down to ensuring that people understand the difference between things that are objectively or stance independently true and things that are stance dependently true, and ensuring that they understand that, that's kind of the foundation, is understanding what, the distinction between those, and then moving forward with that. And also, ensuring that people understand, whoever might be calling in, if we, hopefully we get somebody, I hope I don't scare anybody away, but that they understand that what morality is in and of itself. Like, morality is just the capacity to distinguish between things that fall within what we call the moral category, things that are moral, like this thing is moral, this thing is immoral, this thing is amoral. So these are all moral distinctions. And so the ability that what we call a person who is capable of morality is a person who's capable of making distinctions between things that are moral and immoral and amoral. And a person, and just because the distinctions differ between two people, there are things that I may consider moral that AJ may not, and things that AJ may consider moral that I might disagree with. But just because we disagree with them, disagree on what, if we cut down to, if we were splitting hairs, just because we disagree doesn't mean that either one of us is not a moral person. We can still make those distinctions. The question then is, where do our distinctions overlap, and can we where's the intersubjectivity between the two of us? And then with that intersubjectivity in mind, we can then establish a framework by which we're going to operate together within a society. And that's how societies function, is intersubjectivity. We find the overlaps in what we consider to be moral, what we consider to be immoral, and then we establish a legal framework to reinforce those, and to hopefully provide justice for those who violate that framework. And could it be better? Yes, it absolutely could. Could it be worse? Oh yes. We've looked a short look in the past. We can see how bad it used to be, and how much better it has gotten. I mean, but I don't think, that's pretty much how it works. But it's going to come down to a lot of terminology, I think.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I had this conversation with Visual Gilbert, the one that you're going to be on my show talking about consciousness in the future. And so we did an entire 4-hour show about the morality of sort of like how humans and animals, not their own morality, but rather whether it is moral to utilize animals. It wasn't necessarily only about veganism. I mean, it was just like sort of like the idea of like whether those things are moral imperatives or not. And we came to the conclusion that it's not, despite the fact that I am vegan. But I could not. He won that argument for sure.
When it comes to veganism, I have a very I kind of had, I've heard so many of the debates, so many of the arguments. I have a very, very it doesn't sound great, I recognize that, but I have a very kind of like period at the end of the sentence position on this, and that is that a person who goes about their time like vigorously arguing for this, demanding changes in other people's behavior, like lambasting people for not choosing their lifestyle. I find that to be moral grandstanding. I think the choice to be vegan or to be vegetarian or whatever, I know there's a lot of different aspects of it. That's a personal choice. It's an
Right.
individual to do that, and runs um that choice runs parallel with their personal preferences. They feel it is not moral to do a particular act, so they don't do it. But then to run around screaming like that vegan teacher that everyone else is an immoral monster because they do it.
Yeah.
That doesn't do anything good. That's just moral grandstanding. That's someone who's propping themselves up on a platform to make themselves feel better or to make themselves feel superior to other people. I think that there's people out there who are not, that they are omnivorous. They eat whatever they want and they don't care about the effects on the environment. There are people that are omnivorous like me that greatly care about the effects on the environment. And so everything I do and everything I consume is as sustainably harvested as possible. So I try to, like, all my stuff is I try to control what I buy and where I send my money as much as possible. And I also do a lot of my own. So, and
That's
slowly
cool.
but surely, my wife and I are progressing that we will have our own. We're going to be getting a place that has a lot more acreage. We will have our own livestock. We will harvest our own stuff. Animal husbandry can be done correctly and correctly and sustainably without torturing the animal.
Yeah.
So I think that there's a line there. Is like, but some people don't care. Some people care very deeply. We can recognize these things without chastising or ostracizing people from society based upon their personal preferences. Because even if someone feels that, like, this comes down to stances. It's stance dependent. Like, what
Hmm.
do you think is the best? Like, what is your stance on environmental sustainability? What is your stance on animal cruelty? What is your stance on, nutrition? For nutrition for children, nutrition for the elderly? What is your stance on various things? And then we have to analyze each and every single one of those before we can come to a conclusion. I guarantee you put two vegans together, they're not going to align on every single
For
point.
sure.
So that tells us, one, it's subjective, it's entirely stance dependent, and two,
Yeah.
we shouldn't be attacking people just because they disagree with us. I mean, if you really felt that strongly about it, go change the laws, get involved in the system, and go try and get laws passed that make it harder for like factory farming and like
Right.
commercial agriculture, like limit those things to help protect the environment and to help limit options. Sure, it'll drive the prices up of these things, but that should be a small sacrifice for saving the animals that you want to save. So there's ways to go about it and ways to
Yeah.
not go about it. Yeah.
We are 100% on the same page.
Yeah.
Like, I started eating plant based because I heard, oh hey, it could help you with your type 1 diabetes, make better blood sugar control and stuff, right? And yeah, I used a lot less insulin when I started eating plant based. But I also noticed, oh hey, it's reducing this incredibly painful condition that I have. And so I continued it, and my health improved a whole lot. So I chose it because of a personal reasons. But if I see someone with my same condition, who I'm like, oh hey, you could try this. I won't be like, if you don't try it, you're gonna fucking die. No, that's no. So I did move on to veganism because I'm having lots of conversations with other atheists who are vegans, and like, the more we talk about it, we will, oh, okay, like, that's cool. But that's the way I like it. That's the way I like it. The people that I talked to, like, they were not like yelling in my face with the megaphone or anything. It was just like, hey, like having objectively then from Truth One.
Yes.
Okay, you've been on that. Okay, so
I've had the opportunity to be on there a couple of times. Yeah.
okay, cool. So he's a vegan. And one day I was in Austin and we were in the studio, and he sat there with me for like a whole hour, and we talk about veganism, really cool conversation. We talk about bees and all that kind of stuff. And he was like, okay, that's cool. I learned a lot. Thank you. And that's what moved me toward it. I'm not a perfect vegan. Like, if for me, food waste is sort of like a childhood trauma of mine because
Right.
we did not have very good food access as a kid. My mom sometimes will go without food so that we could have just a little bit of food. So if I if somebody serves me a plate of food and there's really nothing else to eat, or like there is something else to eat, but but taking this plate away from me and throwing it away would mean wasting the food. Let's say nobody else could eat it because of food allergies or something. I'm not gonna waste that food because to me, I value that more than being a perfect vegan. You know what I'm
That or
saying?
you have a garbage disposal like me around, and I'll just go ahead and eat it for you because I got no problem with that. So that my big thing is that I tried once because when I
Yeah.
met my wife was vegetarian, and
Okay.
for like the longest time, she's not anymore, but
Yep.
because she realized how amazing bacon is, and but I tried once. I tried actually went vegan for close to a year before I simply couldn't do it anymore. At first it was interesting because like the first few weeks, it was just like I felt different. He's like you feel like your body's metabolizing things, and I was like, okay, then maybe this is what they're talking about. But 6 months in,
Yeah.
I didn't feel good. Like,
Mm-hmm.
and then a friend recommended to me that, well, you need to be supplementing your diet with all these other things. And then I started looking at what I was missing, and by about 8 months in, the number of pills I was having to take to sustain, like the number of supplements I was having to take this to sustain myself was becoming obnoxiously high to get
Yeah, and
like
expensive,
get
I'm
to,
sure.
and I'm like, this is great. Now I understand that this could be done if the prices were lower on it. This would be more sustainable for some people, but I personally, well, I probably could have afforded it. I just didn't enjoy it. Like the project, it became something that I had to do in order to, is like, wow, this is like, it became like work that I wasn't getting paid for. And so it just became like, so it became something I wasn't looking forward to, when I used to like very much look forward to what I was going to have for breakfast, what I was going to make, or like this. And I was kind of like, as far as just quality of life, I couldn't continue on. Number one, I just didn't feel well. I didn't feel the way I usually felt, and because I was having to take all these supplements, I was, you metabolize them slightly differently, and so I was kind of like, I just don't feel like myself. And
Yeah.
then when I switched back, within a couple of weeks, I was back to normal. My energy levels went back up. I was suddenly more active again. I wanted to go to the gym again. I wanted to be active. I wanted to be outside with the dogs, and I wanted to, I kind of like my favorite joke. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie or seen the show Community. Have you ever seen that show?
I watched like a couple episodes of it.
There's a joke in there that I find quite funny, is like when the character Britta is leading a protest against the school cafeteria for them having meat products. And so she and all of her vegan friends have these signs out there, like, like this. And then some action happens, and then she finally, she's like, she gets distracted, and then she comes back to the protest line, and they're all leaving. And she's like, where are you going? What's going on? It's like, I'm sorry, Britta, I just can't. I ate a hamburger and I'm just not cold anymore. And she just,
Oh,
and her friends walk away. I was like, I kind of it's funny, but I kind of understand with the reasoning behind that. It's like, I ate a hamburger and I'm not cold anymore. So
no.
great. And so I just found it to be amusing in that respect. But that's, you know, it's satire. But yeah, it's for some people. It's for
That
some
is funny.
people. It's not
Yeah.
for others. So
It is, yeah, for me, it has taken, my family is not vegan, of course, but for me, it has taken quite a bit of effort. And, like you really have to plan and make sure that you're getting all the right things. And there's a lot of people that don't like tofu or beans or like, the high protein stuff that you
mm,
get. And the fake vegan foods, the fake vegan meats, for example, I like them, but they're not healthy. And if I'm doing it for the health, then it doesn't track that I will give up meat for fake meat because like
right.
it's probably doing the same type of damage. So eating whole foods has been like more where I try to be, and but that's not how most vegans do it, and that's where it can get to like, okay, you're not having the proper amount of nutrients, and you lose your energy, and you do all these things. But like I said, it's not for everybody, and I'm not there. I don't tell a single person to go vegan. I just share,
Right.
hey, this is my story. This is how it helped me. That's that.
Right.
Yeah, but shows. Talking about shows, TV shows. Do you like? I imagine that you like true crime or like psychological
I,
thrillers,
I I
horror.
do. Yeah, movies more so. True crime. like true crime shows, I if one catches my eye, something that's kind of interesting, I may watch it. I dig films more like fictional, like fictional films. Once you've looked at enough of the kind of gutters of humanity that
Mm-hmm.
or you've looked at the gutters of humanity to the extent that I have, not to say that I'm special or anything like that, but once you've seen it, like seeing it on TV, it's kind of like I'm not surprised. It's kind of like, oh, I understand why that happened. And you pretty much pick out their pathology, from their psychopathology. From it's like, yeah, I understand why he did that. You can see all the markers are right there. So it's just not surprising to me. But there's occasionally like an interesting one, like the don't f with cats one. That one got me
Oh,
because that was the internet coming together to catch a killer. And so I thought that was brilliant. That was a brilliant documentary. There's a few
yeah.
like really good ones. The Slender Man killing, the Slender Man stabbing that took place. I think it was it was in New York or no, Michigan. It was up in Michigan, I think, or somewhere up there. Forget the state, but ones like that are kind of intriguing. But by and large, I like the movies a little bit more. But which one are you talking about?
Well, no, I was just asking what was like sort of your favorite genre.
Ah,
Uh, Probably horror, I imagine.
I think my absolute favorites are the ones are the documentaries, the true crime documentaries that explore that explore where urban legends
Ooh,
are informed by where reality crosses over and is informed it informs urban legends. One of my favorites was the Cropsey one, which was which is a New York State urban legend about a killer. It's a very very boogeyman style one, but has a great deal of grounding within real events that occurred around a sanitarium that we used to operate back in the day that eventually shut down, and really really horrible stuff that was going on. And then one of the orderlies there, was when they didn't do background checks and such. One of the orderlies there was a really horrific person. When the place closed down, they kind of
wow.
hung around the area and were camping out in the woods, and then people started disappearing. And that's what gave birth to the Cropsey legend. That area, I believe, is Long Island. I think like that became a Long Island kind of urban legend. But that urban legend inspired The Burning, which was one of my favorite horror films. Inspired The Burning, and to a degree inspired Friday the 13th.
Wow. I did not know
So
that.
interesting, yeah,
I
interesting
learned
stuff like that.
something.
How real life kind of inspired. Like, you see it in the social paradigms, kind of like the legends that we talk about, the things that we whisper about, and how that informs art. And so, but the Cropsey legend is a fascinating one.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I used to really enjoy watching like true crime and like psychological thrillers that have like what's the name, Harlan Coben type
Oh yeah.
shows, which is like twists and turns and like everywhere, and you don't know what's next, and then you find out there was like you completely underestimated who was gonna be the true criminal of the story. But then I became part of a one of those twisty turny true crimes, and I got traumatized, and I'm going to write a book one day. I swear I'm gonna write a book, and I'm gonna send it to you. I send you a copy for sure.
Sweet.
But
There is
yeah.
something in the live chat that I wanted to kind of address.
Oh, let's see.
To spam goes here. Yeah, a moral monster is a monster that violates morality, not a monster with morality. So it's an important distinction to make here, is that a person who's a moral monster is being assessed. They're being assigned that by individuals external of themselves. That we would, like, you would look at another person's actions, say that person is a moral monster because the choices that they're making are immoral. But to say that individual themselves doesn't have their own sense of morality
Uh-huh.
is not always the case. Many times, individuals that commit acts that are largely seen as atrocious or abominable, that they themselves have their own kind of moral evaluation process. And sometimes it's delayed. Sometimes it's, I don't want to use the R word in a clinical sense, where the actual like processing is slower. Sometimes there are individuals out there that they cannot internalize the consequences of their action or even the guilt of what they might do until after they do the act. The impulse is there to do the act. And then for many of us, we may feel the impulse to commit what we
Mm-hmm.
know would be an atrocious action. I want to punch that person in the face, or I want to, whatever. But then, as a part of that rationalization process, we envision
Okay.
ourselves doing it. We recognize the pain we would cause. We recognize the potential harm it would do to us, the risk to ourselves, and then we go through the entire process, and then we opt not to do it, because it either makes us feel bad that we would do it, it makes us sick to our stomach. We have that visceral gut reaction to it, the feeling of violence. Or we think about what society would do to us if we were to get caught, and we think of the consequences, and then we don't do it. And then we opt not to do it, despite the emotional impulse at the start. There are people out there that do that. They go through that impulse. They have that impulse, but they can't control it. And they wind up doing the action. And then after they've committed the act, that is when the rationalization begins, and they can feel absolutely terrible for what they've done. But they don't
Sure.
feel it until after they've committed the act, not before, because they empathize on kind of a delay compared to everybody else. Now, this is actually more common than we would think. Fortunately, our society is really, really good at kind of like conditioning our children to behave a certain way, in preschool, kindergarten, so on and so forth. We do a really good job, by and large, of conditioning kids not to do this, so long as there are consequences that are learned at an early age to help their brains develop. But there are very few monsters out there which simply do not care. They recognize that it's wrong, or they what they recognize is that other people think it's wrong. Society says it's wrong, but they ultimately don't care, because it's all about the fulfillment of their own personal fantasy, of their own impulses. And that's all that matters to them. But those individuals are extraordinarily rare. But even they can still make distinctions, because they can
Right.
recognize that their actions are viewed as being immoral, even though they themselves don't consider them to be moral. They can still make a distinction. They know the difference between right and wrong. They simply don't care. So that's still a moral person. They're still capable of moral distinction. It just doesn't inform their actions the way it does you and I. And then you have the kind of like odd individual that lacks the capacity to do. When we say that people don't have the capacity to reason about what they're doing, people of mental defect that simply lack the functionality, and they're simply reacting. They're reacting to stimuli.
Right.
So they may do something horrifying, but in their minds, they never even thought about it. It was like there was no consideration of whether this is good or bad. They're either reacting out of self-defense, or they're reacting out of impulse because they lack higher functionality, higher control deficits. They have control deficits, and so they lack that ability. So these are also very, very rare individuals. But those are people that we would label them as being mentally ill, and that they would need to be institutionalized and medicated probably for the rest of their lives. So, but nonetheless, just arbitrarily describing people as like having no morality, it's a danger. It's a slippery slope that, psychologically speaking, that we don't want to get into, because then we start writing off entire reams of people that could have been helped,
Yeah.
but we write them off because, they're just moral monsters. It's like they just have no morality whatsoever. No, they do. It's just different from ours. This is
Right.
just one of the things and this is what we would expect if, like, moral valuations, ethical valuations are subjective, which they are.
Yeah. There was a show I watched one time about true psychopathy, and the ones that are actually diagnosed, and they had found that they had differences in their brains, like that joke that you made last time, like the distance between the gyre and the circuit, right? And there's also the
Mm-hmm.
distances between like different parts of the brain, like parts of the prefrontal cortex, the amygdala, etc., or even the insular cortex thickness, sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And when those parts are not well developed from very early childhood, they turn into that true psychopathy, and the person is
Or by
just
damage. Or by damage. We've seen
unable.
damage can do it.
Right.
Yeah,
Oh yeah,
right.
damage
Yeah.
as well. Yeah, correct.
Yeah.
The person is just physically unable to feel empathy, so they may be
Right.
hurting someone physically, but their empathy just doesn't work. It doesn't work, and it is not their fault. Now, it doesn't mean they're not going to get punished or have accountability for the actions that they committed, but they just do not have that ability. It's just not possible for them to have it.
There's a lot of moving parts when it comes to our bodies, when it comes to how we go through the moral evaluation process as a part of our limbic system. And with so many moving parts, if any one of them fails to a degree, you're going to get deficits in what we would classify as being typical presentations. And so any one of those areas, and like people born that way, exceptionally rare. More often it's damage that they have incurred at some point, and that damage can occur at any point. It could occur in the womb during development. It could occur via genetic predisposition. It could occur via trauma, when they're a child, a number of different things. We know that fundamentally altering the structures of the brain physically, by altering the physical structure of the brain, you can fundamentally alter the individual themselves. So there's like mountains of data that's out there about this, that we know that it really comes down to the brain and the way it develops, which is so vitally important.
Yeah, the one that fascinates me is the insular cortex, where I think Gabor Mate was talking about this recently, and he was saying that during childhood, sometimes there is just a complete lack of nurturing, of what is the word? Not abandonment, but like when the child is not cared for properly, and so
neglect.
Neglect, correct? Yeah. Sometimes second word. And so what happens is that the insular cortex is not damaged. It's just not. It just doesn't fully develop the way that it
Underdeveloped,
will.
right?
Right. So it is just simply underdeveloped, and that has a lot to do with disgust, for example. So if someone were to do something that somebody else considers disgusting, like kicking a puppy, this person will not have that same response, and it can all lead back to childhood traumas, sort of thing. But going back to morality, you were, I think it was on the last show or something, we were talking about what moral realism versus moral anti-realism is. And I'm not the best on this topic, so teach us, please, educate us.
So the easiest way to put this is moral anti-realism, or moral realism versus moral anti-realism. The idea that moral statements in and of themselves are mind stance independently true, or that moral statements or evaluations are mind stance dependently true, subjective versus objective. And so with moral realism, the important thing to remember is that if moral statements or moral evaluations were objectively true, if certain moral statements were mind stance independently true, they would be true regardless of the existence of a God. So you don't need a God. You would simply point to that thing that grounds that is what is a feature of the universe, that whatever X action is immoral, or whatever Y action is moral, that those statements would be as true as the moon orbits the earth. So like they would be irrefutable. So obviously we're going to have some difficulty in doing that. You have some individuals that will resort to something like Platonism, where these moral statements are features in like the Platonic realm, that's where they're grounded, that these are actual like features of the universe. There's individuals who will appeal to our biology and the fact that in order to live, we are required to do certain things, and those things facilitate certain moral actions that should be facilitating those. But ultimately, anything beyond like the Platonic realm, like I'm not a Platonist myself. I don't think many people still are, but for a lot of moral realists, it's going to wind up coming down to their stances, which is what leads us to moral anti-realism, which is mind stance dependent, typically stance dependent. So whatever your stances are that inform how you evaluate a particular thing, if you yourself see action X, you evaluate action X, and your evaluation of X leads to a moral valuation, and that moral valuation informs your ought as to what you ought do in response to what is the case. And what is the case is action X. That is the is ought distinction, or the is ought that David Hume identified was, this is the state of affairs, this is what you ought do. And what Hume identified was that there was a gap. The is ought problem is that what you ought do cannot be logically inferred simply by what is. So there's no so if X is the case, what ought I do? Well, you can't just look at what is and just logically jump that gap. There has to be something that bridges that. And what Hume identified that was ethical valuations, was that we assess the information, we assess what information we have, we look at the scenario, and then we evaluate how these things go along, how these things inform, or how our stances inform these things. And then in accordance with our stances, we then choose our ought and to move forward. So moral anti-realism, all of the evidence indicates that it is the case. Trying to ground moral realism is problematic, especially when you try to ground it in the idea of a God, because the God entity is in of itself a mind, and a mind has, an agent has its own stances. There's nothing external of it. The God, by definition, nothing external of it informs what it ought do. So it simply either becomes a tautology where it does what it does because it does what it does, or they say it's good, because it's good, which is just it's an uninformative tautology, or the thing is operating by its own stances, and the thing is good because it says it's good, which is just subjective to it. So ultimately, either way you slice it, it's going to come down to moral anti-realism. I've never heard anybody present a solid argument for moral realism, because it always winds up coming down to something they individually value. Like they have a value for an aspect of human life, or they have a value for human life in general, or they have a value for this particular relationship, or somehow it's going to come down to, it's always grounded in one of their stances, something that they themselves, they value very highly. And that's what's informing their oughts. Humans ought do this because I value this particular thing. Even secular humanists who will advocate for a position going forward as to what we ought do in the light of humanism. Humanism in itself is entirely subjective, because it takes the subjective position that all humans are valuable because of our attributes, the fact that we can empathize, we can reason, and we can think, and so on and so forth. That's the grounding for why we have value as individuals, but that's entirely subjective. That's a stance dependent. So even that is stance dependent. So the problem that I run into with a lot of theists is that they either try to ground stance dependent statements they'll try to ground statements that they think are mind dependent in a mind, which is a logical contradiction, or they try to flip it on the non-believer and get them to try to say that their subjective positions, that their subjective evaluations are somehow mind stance independently true, and try to catch us in that. Because if they're not, then why ought anyone follow them?
Right.
So this is why the argument, this is why it's so interesting, because whether it's me saying this is what we ought do, or whether it's a God saying this is what you ought do, it's going to be subjective either way.
Right.
So
then it's the God telling you, so where did his morality come from?
Okay. This is the heart of the Euthyphro dilemma, is because if the God is saying, okay, you're familiar with the Euthyphro, this is where I like to go with it. The Euthyphro dilemma is a basic question for those who may not be familiar with it. I use it a lot. And that is, the question becomes, is a thing good because God does it, or does God do it because it's good? And so there's a lot of history that goes into the question with, with Euthyphro and Plato, and, having discussion about these things. But the idea is that it's what we call an exhaustive dichotomy. If it's good because God does it, then that means that the quality of its goodness is only because the God has dictated it to be good, with referencing nothing external of itself. There is no grounding substrate beyond the God itself, so therefore it is good simply because the God has declared it to be so, which is subjective to it. But if God does it because it's good, then that means that there is a substrate beyond the God that the God itself is referencing for why the thing it does is good. And so whatever the God's opinion might be is irrelevant to whatever the substrate says, which means the God is not ultimate. It's not the one that makes the ultimate decision as to what is good and bad. It's simply referencing something external of itself to inform its own actions. And so either way, the God either loses power, it's not ultimate, there's something beyond it, or it's entirely subjective to itself. And there's no escaping this. And you will hear, for anybody out there who has ever heard somebody try to get around the Euthyphro dilemma by saying like, well, no, it's a false dichotomy because God is good. God is definitionally good. Okay, not only is that an uninformative tautology, like I said before, because God equals good, good equals God, God equals God. It doesn't tell us anything, but it's just it's literally just an attempt to push the Euthyphro dilemma back one, because if they say that God is good, then you can say, well, if God is God good in accordance with what it declares, or is it good in accordance with something external of itself? Is there an external standard? Like what is it meeting? So is it good according to what it says, or is it good according to something else that grounds it? And it's still subjective to it, because if it just, what are you referencing in response? Like what is it in reference to? What's supplying the context there? If God's the only thing that is there, the most ultimate thing that is there, then it's going to be subjective. You can't escape it.
That's right. Yeah. Sorry.
Sorry, there's a bit of a rambling there. So
No, that was
too much.
great. Very educational. I was only gonna say that we have a call, so we are gonna put that for later, and we will take the call now. It is Ralph, who was in the chat earlier, and he's from Australia. Him, and the topic is empathy in sociopaths, in self-awareness and moral behavior. So, okay. Hey, Ralph, how's it going? Let's see. Hopefully we have the sound working. I don't think we hear anything yet. Okay, I was turning my sound up. I was making sure I wasn't like missing something.
Yeah, I heard the beep.
Oh, there you are. Okay.
Aussie.
Here I am. Oi, oi.
Yeah, there we go.
Calling back to a point that we had earlier, talking about morality in people that are judged to be immoral by other people, but think that they are being moral themselves. Classic example being, well, Hitler thought he was doing the right thing, turned out to be a monster. In sociopaths, I have heard that they have a disconnection between their sense of morality and their sense of empathy. It seems that in some mental, some neural architectures, whatever, people have a default state of empathy turned on, others have it turned off. If you can find a way of convincing the sociopath to start thinking in moral terms, projecting themselves onto others, you can actually get them to deliberately engage their sense of empathy. Often you link that to family, for example. How would you feel if your mother, whatever? They're actually capable of becoming quite moral by learning the steps rather than intuitively feeling it because this sense is always turned on. There's a couple of treatments I've heard of that try to condition the person to willingly become as moral as they can to try and work around their social handicap, if you could call it that. Have either of you heard anything about that?
I've read a little bit about what you're talking about. I know that it's currently ongoing, and that as far as any big conclusions come, I know that there haven't been any large solutions as to this, but I think it's a very, very novel attempt to try and address this issue. From my experience, from my education, I anticipate it being able to be effective in a percentage of the population of individuals who have these diagnoses, but not all of them. And that's simply because brains are so inherently different. Each brain is unique to the individual. So each parameter, you need to adjust the therapy. You need to custom cut the therapy to each individual, and that takes time. And that also really greatly depends upon how much the individual wants to be helped or how much they want to change. So these are all going to be major factors that play into how successful these kind of therapeutic treatments are going to be. I do think there are a number of individuals out there who are diagnosed as such and would much prefer to be able to lead what we would consider to be typical lives, or what we say normal lives amongst normal society, without feeling the way that they feel or without thinking the way that they think, just because they recognize the cognitive dissonance between what society expects of them and that what their own impulses are telling them. And so they'd rather not have that. I do know there are some people out there that are like that this type of therapy may help, But some people, I don't think that it will, because some people don't mind that. They just don't care about the dissonance. They're more interested in their own impulses and what they're more interested in them getting theirs, and regardless of the effect on anybody else around them. I think it's very interesting. It's very interesting work, and I think it'll probably need another, I would say, 10 to 15 years to really get some solid data behind it, to say maybe we could work this into a solid therapeutic treatment for some people that fall within a scale. We may even see the DSM-6 before we actually are able to establish any of this kind of stuff. But I think it's really fascinating. A new kind of way of approaching as our understanding of the brain improves over time.
And there's also not necessarily how much someone wants the help. For example, I know someone who has OCD, and their life was taken over by the OCD impulses that the rituals that they had. And as much as they wanted help, it was like they had this sort of their own OCD had this internal opposition to accepting the help, right? They were unable to accept the help until they were medicated. Once they were medicated, they were able to accept the therapy and the cognitive therapy and exposure therapy and all of that stuff. So it's like sometimes you have to first shift the chemistry, and then the person sort of gains the ability to be able to get that extra step. Yeah. What do you think about that, Ralph?
Essentially breaking down habitual walls so that they can start building up new patterns that will allow them to accept whatever it is that they want in order to change. Yeah.
It's the same as developing a regimen of behaviors that you repeat over time to develop those neural pathways to reinforce that behavior, so that eventually it becomes reactionary instead of something that you have to think about and actively do. And that, just like any therapy, that takes time. It's like learning new coping mechanisms to deal with anxiety and stress. You simply you teach yourself to recognize the trigger, and then to recognize the response, and then actively choose to respond in a certain way. And over time, that gets easier. It never really ever goes away, but it gets easier and easier over time as you develop those neural pathways, and your brain learns to communicate in a new way, communicate with itself in a new way. So it doesn't trigger those same, but even then, in extremely emotional instances, that's one of the hardest things to do, is to override the brain's emotional responses, because those triggers are tied to emotional reactions. And so when your brain has a triggering stimuli, your brain will immediately go into that emotional response, and that immediately triggers the reflex. And so trying to break it of that habit is exceptionally difficult. And I'm all for, I think that there are a number of therapies that are that have shown a great deal of success. And I'm a big advocate for psychedelic therapy, for the psychedelic therapeutic measures that have shown tremendous promise in helping to rewire the brain more readily, because it gets the brain in a state in which that rewiring is easier facilitated through the repetition of action. So I think there should be more momentum there, and even to a degree, psychedelic therapy may be able to help individuals in these situations, just so long as it's in incredibly controlled environments. It's really, we're kind of like what we're talking about here right now is kind of like bleeding edge therapeutic methodology. And so maybe one day we'll see it. It's good to know that there are people out there, that there are therapists out there, and that there are scientists out there that are working in that field, because I think it's where psychiatry is really, really important, because the pharmacology is going to play a major role in that. Because unfortunately, we can't just go into someone's brain and just like remake their brain in order to do something differently. We have to teach the brain, and so hopefully one day we can get there. And the more resources we put into it, the better it will be. We just need more resources going into it. But that requires us to have a greater desire as a society for mental health access and mental health, research. We need this stuff big time. We just need more of it,
Yeah, which is what we talked about in the beginning of the show. Yeah, definitely.
But I love it. It's fascinating stuff. It's really, really interesting stuff. It will definitely help people.
Yeah.
Yep. Sounds good. No, that was all. I just wanted to ask your thoughts on that one.
Oh yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah, we have another caller, so we're gonna move on to the next one. But great call, and I hope we hear from you again. Thank you so much, Ralph.
Okay, see ya.
Take care.
Okay, so the next caller is Theo, him from Switzerland. That's where my parents live. Argument for moral realism found in secular natural law theory. Okay, that would be one
Secular
for
natural
you.
Hey,
law
guys.
theory. How's it going?
Hey, Theo.
Very good.
Good to hear from you.
Greetings, all.
He's a friend of the community.
So I'm kind of curious.
Yeah, I thought,
If
sorry?
can you elaborate on what you mean by secular natural law theory? Because I know I know what those four words mean in like independently, but like what are you referring to by putting them all together?
Yeah, sure. So I'm coming from a law philosophical perspective in which you have to decide what are you basing your laws on. And there you have two main streams, like you have law positivism. That would be you only have law is what we set up to be a law, or versus natural law theory, which means there are certain natural given rights or natural given duties that we have to respect, kind of like a moral compass to judge the laws we write. So you can't set up any law. You have to respect certain natural rights in this theory.
Okay, so these wouldn't be like, okay, so these aren't laws in the objective sense, like because I was understanding law in this respect as like a law being a description of something that occurs in nature or occurs in reality. So that would be like a scientific law as opposed to a scientific theory, which is the laws describe what happens, whereas a theory describes why it happens. And so it's not a law in that sense. I want to make sure. Secular being the separation of basically secular in the terms of governance, where religion doesn't play a role in the governance of the people. And so it sounds to me like you're describing like secular humanism, where the humanistic approach is valuing individuals, is that each individual has equal value because they are human, because they have the ability to empathize, the ability to rationalize, to reason, to think, they have identity. And so because of their attributes, humans have inherent value because they have attributes, and that the government should establish laws governing behavior based upon that recognition. But the problem is that it wouldn't be moral realism, because the valuation of humans' abilities to empathize and reason and rationalize, that requires someone to value those things. And so the valuation of those capacities is entirely subjective. So it would still be a form of moral anti-realism because it's still subjective. It's just simply codifying these things in law, but those would just be laws of society that we all collectively agree upon. But just because we collectively agree upon them, just because they're intersubjective, doesn't make them objectively true. So it wouldn't be moral realism.
No, I don't agree there. I would say they are based on biological, natural desires of us as a species, and therefore you can argue there is a moral realism to it, because it's not a matter of voting, of a majority vote on it. Human rights are supposed to be inalienable and natural given. You can violate them, but you have no right to don't recognize them by law, you know?
Yeah, but who said, but Theo, who says that these rights should be inalienable? Who says that these rights are inalienable? Is that a law of the universe?
Well, it's kind of the nature of our existence is we want these rights. We don't want to be killed. We want to strive for our liberty and for happiness, you know.
Okay,
Right.
so
within our nature,
but just because we as a species have a preference, Yes, but just because we as a species have a preference for how the vast majority of us would like to live, so this is not even universal. Not all human beings value these things. But just because the vast majority of us do, doesn't make it, just makes it a feature of our biology. It doesn't make it it doesn't mean that rights ought to be, and like rights are inalienable and are inalienable as a mind stance independent fact of reality. Like, that's not a statement that's true, like the Earth orbits the sun. That's an objective, that's a mind stance independent truth. The sun, the Earth orbits the sun. These are facets of reality that are factual. Okay. And then you have like things that are analytically true, like 2 + 2 = 4. But these things are dependent upon how much an individual values the things that you're pointing at. Just because they're intersubjective, just because we can agree upon them, doesn't make them mind stance independently true of reality itself. It requires minds to make the valuation that they're important.
Right, because even the right to life, we can argue that murder is wrong, right? Or that taking another person's life is wrong. And you could say, okay, yeah, that's a natural given law or whatever, but it is not right. It's a natural given right. But it really is not, because when we set up the justice system, we decided that it is okay to take someone's life if they're threatening yours. So it isn't like an objective moral thing to not take a life.
Now, I agree with you. I agree with you, Theo. I agree with you, Theo. We can treat these things in a secular sense, like in a societal sense. We can certainly treat these things as though they are objective, but in reality, they're objectively true for the society in respect to the goal that we want to accomplish. There's a big difference between something that is objectively true or mind stance independently true and something that is objectively true in relationship to a goal that people agree that they want to attain. So it is objective. So like, for example, if we want to accomplish X, then it is objectively true that we ought do Y because of the relationship between X and Y. The best analogy that I have for this is that the game of chess is entirely mind stance dependent. There is no like mind stance independent rules for chess, or what the board must look like, or what the pieces must look like, or how the pieces must move. This is all entirely invented by human beings. But if the goal of two people, if you and I sit down across from each other, and if our like agreed upon goal is to win a game of chess, then in order to win a game of chess, it is then objectively true that we must play by the rules of chess. But it's only because of the relationship between the goal and the is. So there's still an evaluative process there. It's like we intersubjectively agreed upon the goal, and now we ought to do a thing to accomplish the goal. If all of a sudden you disagree and you don't want to accomplish that goal anymore, that's when you can bust out a giant plastic dinosaur and start smashing the pieces on the board and say you win, because now we're not playing chess anymore. So the reality is, we're talking about there's two different kinds of context here, and so it still falls into moral anti-realism. Okay, just because it's objective in relation to the goal, but we're talking about objective moral realism would be in reference to things that are true mind stance independently. Okay, they don't require a mind to be true. So,
but what if our goal is not to set up chess rules? Am I interrupting? I'm sorry.
No, you're good. Go ahead.
Okay. So, what if our goal is not to set up some subjective chess rules, but to find the chess rules which our nature is best represented? I think that's the difference. We try not to set the rules. We try to discover what's best for our nature.
Right. And it's going to come down to what your stance is informing what is best for our species. What I determine is best for our species may differ from what you determine is best for our species, but there may be some overlap in how we go about it. And maybe, so maybe we say we both agree that we want the species to flourish. That could be a common goal that you and I agree on. But how we go about it can be entirely different. You could say, I want the species to flourish by solving the hunger problem. Okay. I can say, I want the species to flourish by eliminating half of all life. That way there's more resources to go around and everyone will be taken care of. So you're taking like the extreme charitable action. I'm taking the Thanos action. Both of our actions will result in the same outcome. A number of people with the resources they need to flourish and live happy lives. But it's how we go about it. And that is what's going to be informed by our stances. So we may agree upon a goal, but we also kind of have to agree upon how we go about these things. You know, which is best, the most utilitarian, the Machiavellian.
Yeah, we didn't
go, but that's
all the same goal if one of us wants to kill half of humans, you know.
Do what?
We don't have the same goals yet. If one of us wants to reduce humanity by half, and the other wants to make everybody's life as possible as possible, as good as possible.
The goal was the same, though. It just doesn't matter how you reach it.
Yeah,
it's like
Go ahead.
The turtle on the hare, right? The story of the turtle on the hare. They both want to get to the end. One of them runs, and the other one takes a nap, and then just runs really fast. It's like they get there in different ways, but they both have the same goal. I think that's what.
But that's not the same. It's not the same goal if you say well-being increased by reducing humanity, you know.
No, it is. It is. Says, no, it is the same. We both want human flourishing, but both you and I recognize that there are limitations to human flourishing. One of the biggest ones is a shortage of food. So there's two ways that we can go about this. We can either make more food in order to feed everybody that currently exists, or we can half everyone that exists, and then all the food that is currently existing will be more than enough to feed everybody that survives.
Right. You may not see it as a terrible thing. You may see it as like, oh, okay, we are going to sacrifice certain things. You could even convince people to take their own lives, to be like, hey, this is going to improve your children's life, your grandchildren's life, and they may agree to it. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be the one murdering them. But because ultimately you had the same goal, but you're reaching it through different methods, whether they be positive methods or negative methods, it's still the same outcome.
So, like I said, these things inform. These things are informed. These things are informed by our stances, which it makes them stance dependent, because it just depends upon our individual valuations. We see a thing. Yeah. Like something external of ourselves, we evaluate it, and it's through that evaluation, by checking our stances, that informs what we ought do. So while I agree with your idea of like, I agree with secular humanism, I agree with this, like highly agree with secular humanism being the way forward, predominantly because secular humanism fundamentally secular humanism does not reinforce harmful in-group, out-group distinctions, which is really, really important because religions do that. So I'm really big on secular humanism going forward, but it's ultimately subjective because I personally happen to value, my stance is that these things make humans valuable. But then again, that's to a degree. Some people will be like 100%, every living human being on the planet has value because of that. I don't necessarily agree with that. Okay, I don't. So there's still limitations. These are all hallmarks. These are all little clues that tell you that these things are stance dependent. While we agree on it, it's still stance dependent. It wouldn't be. We could treat them societally, like you and I. We could walk around being like, "Yep, this is what's true about reality." But the reality of it is, it's not. It's still subjective. We just want the whole of the group. We want the majority to agree with us, is what it is. That's why we argue for what is best, or what we think is best.
I would argue, even if the majority doesn't agree, I would argue for the rights of humans, the human rights, and that it's wrong to kill somebody, you know. So I would always say there is some truth value to it, which is based in our nature. It's not our choice, our opinion, but it's our nature we have to respect. But you can get to secular humanism in a constructivist way, or in a pragmatic way, or even in this natural law way. There are different routes to come to secular humanism.
You're right, and the path that is chosen will be informed by one's stances.
Yeah, but let me say this: every stance, every normative requires subjective thinking, but it doesn't mean that this subjective thinking must be biased or completely free of truth. You know, I think there is this equivocation fallacy, because you can have subjective from a subject, normative, but you can still have truth value in this value.
Well,
Yeah,
in these respects, what is true for you, would be true. I mean, like describing your positions, but there wouldn't be those. We're talking about like a position, like what is true about reality. The truth of it is the case in reality that you have a particular stance, so that is true about you. So, but I mean, these are yes, these are qualified, but they're not going to be the same. There's going to, like I said, these things are intersubjective. There's going to be a lot of overlap, but it's not going to be universal. So we can agree upon them, but yeah, it's all about just, trying to figure out what's best for us.
Don't you think an alien, sentient and intelligent as we are, would have the same ethics, would also require the right of life and stuff like that?
Not necessarily. I could see another species out there wanting to eradicate all other intelligent species in order to safeguard its own, to eliminate competition.
Yeah, okay, of course, but that's purely pragmatic, that's not
right. Yeah, there's a cold logic to it, right?
Okay, but thanks for taking my call. It's interesting for me. These moral discussions are always interesting.
Oh yeah, I love them. It's one of my favorites.
I think if you don't have a hard objective, then it's kind of if you say everything is subjective, then you're kind of making everything on the same level. Like it's just a matter of opinion what you follow. But I think that's wrong. We have to respect life and LGBTQ rights and everything. I think
I agree with you.
Clear.
I agree with you, but those are stance-dependent positions. They are. Now, but I love what you brought up, because you just highlighted a big thing here. Okay? Yes. If it is the case, which I hold that it is, if it is the case that all of these things are subjective, then we are going to run into a natural problem in trying to find a kind of through line for every single person on the planet. That's a difficulty. Yes, we're going to run into those disagreements. The point is, just because those disagreements exist doesn't mean finding that middle ground is impossible. It just means it's really, really hard, and we need to be able to work together to find it. And a lot of moral realists that I've talked to who have engaged with this, they try to envision what it would be like for human beings to try and find the perfect moral, or like the moral system that works for every single person on the planet. And it seems impossible, but I myself am not cynical enough to believe that it is impossible. I think it's just very, very daunting, and that not enough people are incentivized to do that kind of work. But I think if we put our minds together as a species and stopped with this whole national identity, but the idea the combined identity of humanity, that we actually could do it. We could find that middle line up from the individual all the way to the planet. We could. It's just obviously very, very daunting. We have to be willing to do that. that's just me. That's my
But,
that's my
a
stance.
last idea. Sorry.
No,
A
that's just
last
me. That's
idea I
my
have.
stance.
What do you consider progressive? You know, for me, progression goes into one direction, and therefore I think we see a clear direction towards respecting more and more people, respecting the whole scale of human diversity, while we come from racism, xenophobia, whatever, colonialism. And I think progression has a clear direction, and its fairness must be for everybody. So that's why I think there is a clear direction ethics has to develop.
I think it will, yeah. Just trying to find that middle ground. You know,
Right.
it's tough.
It is, yeah. And that's why we do sort of like this majority win stances that we have on certain morality aspects, right? That we look at what causes the least harm, and that's how we decide what seems to be right or wrong. And we are not going to get it 100% right every time for all the things, but it is the best method that we currently have.
I can say just by looking at the statistics, looking at the national and the international statistics, we are doing, societally speaking, a lot better than we were 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. That things by and large are getting better. We see violent crime going down. We see a number. We see downturn. We're seeing downturns in a lot of this stuff. Yes, there are going to be individual moments, and there's going to be like moments of like violence, of like and you know, things that crop up here and there. There's going to be conflict. It's not, you're never going to be able to. I don't think you're ever going to be able to avoid it. The question is how we deal with the conflict. And so, but by and large, our systems today are far better than they used to be because of progressive action. We just need to keep plugging away and moving in that direction, you know, and it's going to get harder before it gets easier, simply because the more progressive we become and the more accepting of people we become, the harder those fringe minorities who don't want that kind of equality, the harder they're going to fight. And so we need to be willing to fight just as hard. So, but
Love
by
it.
and large, if you look at where we were, you know, 1900, 1950, 2000, now 2026, we're on a good trend. We really are. Okay. We just need to make sure we stay on that trend, because now the forces that don't, now there are forces out there that don't want us to be equal, that don't want equal rights, that don't want equal access to healthcare, to mental health care, to, you know, any of the things that we value. They don't want us to have that, because if we have that, it disempowers them. And so, but this is where this is the time for people to come together, you know, to set aside ego and set aside all this stuff and come together and work toward that common goal. Hopefully we'll push through.
We are in Trump times. I think we are in the times of making a step back from progression, but it's exactly the time we have to fight it, and we have to make clear we have principles and ideals, and it's not postmodernism and everybody has an opinion and everything is valuable. I think we have to make sure we stand for certain ideals. Thank you for your time. I took a lot of time of you.
Oh, you're good. Thank you.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much for the call.
Take care.
Good stuff. I'll see
as
you
far
around.
as far as calls go, I'm now ahead of where I was before. I've already broken my record because we only had one call last time I was on. Now we've had two. You know, maybe next time we'll have four. It's amazing.
Yeah, I think. Sorry, I'm looking at the private chat, and they said there was another call, but I don't have the info, so we'll see. We will. I will take a moment then in the meantime to remind people that they can send super chats, and also I guess I'll go over for a second over the next few shows. So next week on this show, Thursday night's Critical Call, we're gonna have Brentley from Punk Apostate talking about Christian homeschooling is really harmful. So that one should hopefully get some calls, hopefully. Then this Sunday, which is in just a few days, at 7 p.m. Central. The show on Skeptic Haven is called Let's Talk, and it's gonna be Neil the 604 and Mikey, his friend Mikey. So they're both pretty cool. Both pretty cool. All right.
Neil's good people.
Okay, so no, actually there was no call. Yeah, this was a fun conversation with them. Neil is pretty awesome. I've been on his show, and we kind of couple, I think, on this channel. Maybe one or two. We really need to make some more. Yeah. So morality. Was there anything else we wanted to cover before the end of the show? We're past the hour and a half. We can keep going for a little bit, or we can finish it up. Up to you.
I think we covered a lot of the big hits. And I think I'm actually going to like toot my own horn here. I think I actually expressed it a lot better than I usually do, because it can get into some really dense territory, especially when you get into like philosophical concepts like the Euthyphro dilemma and, going beyond that. But, I think I expressed it pretty well. I think people in the chat have a good idea as to, how to come at it. And we had 2 good calls. So.
Yeah, I learned a lot. I would say I learned a lot. I like the concept of philosophy, and I've read like the basics, but I'm definitely not a philosopher or ready to have any of the philosophical debates at all. But I like listening to others do it.
I think the key is just to remember that philosophy is really, really useful to an extent. Is that understanding logical fallacies, understanding the difference between objective and subjective, understanding the difference between ontology and epistemology, understanding what one's own individual philosophy of truth is. These are important things. And I think everybody should take the time to at least try to break those down, is to understand their own worldview. But to a greater extent, philosophy, you have to remember that the field doesn't make predictions about reality. It doesn't explain anything in any kind of mechanistic sense. And it doesn't have any applicable power when it comes to like understanding external reality. This is why when you see a lot of people, they fall into a particular philosophical field, or they agree with one, because of how much it aligns with their own subjective intuitions. And so they feel a certain way about the world, and then they wind up taking a philosophical position that kind of reinforces that. But that's why you see that people in their old age typically have different philosophical positions than they did when they were younger. And so philosophy is good to an extent to learn the basics, but going beyond that, it starts becoming more about reinforcing and validating one's intuitions about things. And I think that's where it becomes problematic, because it becomes less about the rules of reasoning and more about why I'm reasoning. And so I think if people keep that in mind, then they can really wield philosophy effectively. Otherwise, we wind up arguing for metaphysical positions that we can't demonstrate to be the case. And we just hold them because they make us feel better about things, or because they seem to be true by the way I'm interpreting reality. And it's all entirely subjective. It's kind of like, why are we doing this? It's like, but there are some important stuff at the foundation.
That's true. That's true. I heard this family member earlier sending me messages about how atheists think that everything came from nothing. And, I always like to troll them back and be like, well, where did God come from? And he's like, well, ask yourself this: why is God the only thing that they're trying to take out of schools and government and blah blah blah? I was like, that does not answer my question. Where did God come from? And he just could not answer it. We went back and forth, and he continued. He was like, well, where did nothing come from? I was like, no, that wasn't the question. Where did God come from? Yeah. So it's like, yeah. Anyway.
If there's any theists in the chat, we can definitely break this down. Number one, God or nothing is a false dichotomy. Okay, it's a big time false dichotomy. The skeptic, if you ever listen to Logic had a fantastic video where he actually broke down all the different kinds of logical possibilities as to what is in between there. So nothing or God, false dichotomy. 2, being an atheist does not logically entail holding any specific scientific or philosophical positions. These things have to be addressed on their own, on their individual merits. So trying to conflate these things into that is just, nonsense. And number three, if you can define your God as being that which is necessary, I can do the same thing for the universe itself. And there's no argument against that because you're simply defining it in that way. But the difference is the universe, I don't have to beg the question of its existence in order to reference it. You're begging the question of the existence of your God in order to reference that thing. So I can define the universe as being necessary and the thing that grounds everything. So I can define it just as easily. And we're literally in the same boat, arguing at each other from each side about who understands the water better, So don't think that it gets you out of that paradigm.
And if one can make the assertion that a God can be eternal, then one can make the assertion that the universe can be eternal.
The universe can be eternal, and the evidence actually kind of supports it to a degree.
Yeah.
Given like things like found like fundamental quantum fields, which existed in a timeless state and are fundamental to the existence of everything else. So there you go. It's literally fundamental, it's necessary, and it's eternal. So done.
Yeah.
The difference is I don't have to beg the question of the existence of quantum fields. We can show them. So there you go. That's the key. That's the kicker.
I mean, we have CERN. Okay, what I had forgotten was to mention that you are going to be back on Skeptic Haven channel on, what's the date? March 28th at, I believe it's 7 p.m. Yeah, I should have that right. At 7 p.m. With Leo Phyllis. Cool.
I don't know why I'm so big in that picture. I shouldn't be the big one in that picture. There should be Leo and David should be forefront. I should be in the background, kind of like, hey, what's happening? Like I'm up in the front, like, what's up?
That's funny. You're the moderator, so I guess that's what they were going with. But yeah, but maybe I should
be slightly transparent. Like in the background, like overlooking, like the god, but just kind of like a part of the background, as though I'm the puppet master. So that's what I should be. But that should be very, very interesting. I don't do a lot of moderation. But Leo is really chill. And I hear good things about David. So hopefully it'll be a good back and forth.
Yeah, I'm not at all familiar with David, but Leo, yeah, I've been on some like after shows or something with him, random hangouts. He's like super smart guy.
Oh, he's good. He is a good dude.
Yeah. Okay. Next, April 8th, Drew Beckius is starting a whole new show called Life After Fate. And the first guest is going to be Candice Gorham, and they're going to talk about what it is like living your faith, right? And okay, I think I got that right. Oh, yeah, that one's also 7 p.m. on that day. Sorry about that. Cool. Or was it? Maybe not. Anyway, you know what you can do, guys? If I got that wrong, just go to the Skeptic Haven page, click on the live tab, and you'll find the thumbnails on there. If you click on a thumbnail, it will give you the actual time in your local time, because all the times I just mentioned are central and time zones suck. So fun stuff coming up for Skeptic Haven. All right, so then we're gonna wrap it up. And first I'm going to read. Thank the chat. Of course, the chat is always engaging. We always get some really cool calls, and also the YouTube members who include rather Kelly Laughlin, Logan Fisher, Cynthia McDonald, Infidel, Angela, Stop the Stupidity, Skeptical Scott, and tons of ice. And next is going to be the Patreons, which include Karen Butcher, Logan Fisher, Amanda McLeod, Rion, Dan D, The Bible Says What, Sunny Shaw, and Phil Calderone. All right, good stuff. Thank you so much, JL. We'll definitely do this again sometime. Always have fun with you.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you everybody for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, leave a comment down there, let us know. You can let us know what the next topic you want to be. You can just leave comments and discussions of whatever we talk about here. It helps the algorithm, so do the technology thing and support the channel. And also, of course, go subscribe to J.L. Warren, Bridge the Divide. That's the channel. Okay, yeah. Hi, thank you everybody for your support, and we'll see you next week.
That's our time tonight on Critical Call. To everyone who called